Guatemala's economy has evolved from a predominantly agrarian base into a diversified mix of services, industry, and remittances. In the latter half of the 20th century, coffee and bananas dominated export revenues and shaped rural life. Yet, as global markets shifted and domestic policies evolved, including the landmark 1952 Agrarian Reform Law, which expropriated large estates and redistributed land to peasant cooperatives, Guatemala managed to sustain average real GDP growth of around 3.5% over the past decade, outpacing many regional peers, and is projected to expand by about 4.1% in 2025. Agriculture remains foundational, accounting for roughly 13% of GDP and employing nearly one-third of the workforce. But its relative share has declined as productivity gains have lagged behind other sectors. Traditional exports like coffee, sugar, bananas, and vegetables have given way to more diversified crops, such as cardamom, rubber, and specialty coffee. Still, smallholders confront fragmented land holdings, limited irrigation, and vulnerability to climate shocks. The 2008-2012 coffee leaf rust epidemic, for example, wiped out up to 50% of yields in key growing regions, prompting the government to launch the National Coffee Rehabilitation Program, which provided subsidized fungicides and training in resilient varietals. Recent initiatives to modernize rural credit under the World Bank-backed Rural Competitiveness Project introduced drought-resistant seeds through USAID partnerships and improve road networks via the PIT, Plan de Infraestructura Turística, are promising, yet structural constraints mean agriculture's contribution has steadily fallen over the past 2 decades. As agricultural share declined, services leapt ahead, now contributing over 60% of output. Tourism, telecommunications, finance, and retail have flourished, especially around urban centers like Guatemala City and colonial Antigua. At the same time, business process outsourcing has drawn foreign firms attracted by lower labor costs and a bilingual workforce. Yet, the persistence of informal commerce, street vending, micro-enterprises, means about half of all employment remains outside formal payrolls, sapping tax revenues, and leaving millions without social protections. To address this, the government introduced the 2017 Formalization and Entrepreneurship Law, which streamlines business registration and lowers fees for micro-enterprises, though enforcement and outreach remain uneven. Meanwhile, tourism has re-emerged as a vibrant contributor. International arrivals reached nearly 2.7 million in 2023, generating around USD 1.2 billion and accounting for roughly 2.5% of GDP. Iconic destinations such as Antigua's cobblestone streets, the Mayan ruins of Tikal, and volcano tours at Pacaya draw diverse visitors. The government's Cuatro Balam initiative aims to develop the Maya Biosphere Reserve, home to Tikal and El Mirador, into the largest archaeological tourism project in Latin America, projecting over 120,000 annual visitors to Tikal alone. Challenges persist. Road access in Petén is patchy, and safety concerns around active volcanoes linger. But the National Tourism Strategy, 2022 to 2030, now focuses on sustainable ecotourism, community-based homestays, and improved transportation links to spread benefits more evenly. Parallel to the services boom, industry, encompassing manufacturing, construction, and utilities, accounts for about 23% of GDP. Textiles and apparel exports to the United States under CAFTA DR have been a bright spot, with exports rising from USD 1.2 billion in 2006 to 0.8 billion by 2023. Meanwhile, food processing, chemicals, and maquiladoras cluster near border crossings. Power shortages and high electricity costs occasionally undercut competitiveness, but planned upgrades to transmission lines under the National Electrification Plan and a gradual shift toward renewables, spurred by the 2019 Renewable Energy Incentives Law, are strengthening the sector's prospects. No discussion of Guatemala's economy is complete without remittances. In 2024, these flows grew 8.6% to nearly $22 billion, about 20% of GDP, pouring mostly from Guatemalans in the United States. Remittances bolster household consumption, seed small businesses, and stabilize the current account, which ran a surplus of roughly 3.2% of GDP through September 2024. However, this dependency also exposes Guatemala to U.S. immigration policy shifts and economic cycles abroad. In late 2023, Congress debated a modest remittance tax proposal, aimed at raising 2% on transfers above $5,000 annually to fund border enforcement, which, if enacted, could reduce flows by an estimated $300 million and trigger calls for diversification of diaspora channels. Guatemala's trade to GDP ratio of roughly 47% reflects strong global integration rather than deep industrialization. The United States remains the largest export market, textiles, agricultural goods, and minerals, while China and Mexico are emerging destinations. Foreign direct investment has concentrated in finance, manufacturing, and telecoms. Over the past few years, more than 70% of FDI targeted financial services and light manufacturing, according to government data. Efforts to attract new capital include the 2022 Special Economic Zones Law, offering tax holidays and streamlined customs for high-tech and agro-processing investors. Macroeconomic stability has been a hallmark. After inflation spiked near 10% in early 2023, it cooled to about 3.6% by mid-2024, comfortably within the central bank's 4% plus or minus 1% target. Public debt hovers around 28% of GDP, and the fiscal deficit was a modest 1.3% of GDP in 2023, well below regional averages. Yet revenue collection remains weak at under 12% of GDP, far below OECD norms, constraining public investment in infrastructure, education, and health. In response, Guatemala enacted the 2021 Tax Modernization Law, introducing digital invoicing requirements and bolstering enforcement. But implementation has been slow outside major urban centers. Despite steady growth, social indicators paint a more complex picture. Over half of Guatemalans lived below the international poverty line. $5 in 2021, with rural, indigenous communities particularly affected, even as remittances lifted some families above the threshold. A Gini coefficient of around 48 underscores one of the highest inequality rates in the Western Hemisphere, driven by unequal land distribution, educational disparities, and uneven access to services. The 1996 Peace Accords complementary agrarian reform, which promised titling for communal lands, has yet to be fully implemented, leaving many indigenous groups without legal security. Looking ahead, Guatemala's next chapter hinges on deepening digitalization, pursuing green growth, and strengthening fiscal capacity. Expanding broadband to rural areas under the 2023 Digital Inclusion Plan and upskilling youth for tech roles through the National Innovation Initiative could amplify service sector gains. Investing in hydropower projects like the Pojom Dam, solar farms under public-private partnerships, and climate-smart agriculture would reduce carbon intensity and shield farmers from extreme weather. Moving from low-cost assembly to value-added manufacturing, specialty foods, textile design, automotive components could deepen industrial linkages. Finally, broadening the tax base through formalization incentives and digital revenue collection systems would finance critical social programs and infrastructure. Guatemala's journey was full of ups and downs, but what this country has shown is persistence to grow. And that's what made it the rising hero of Latin America.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe.